With year 10 of Rainbow Six Siege just now releasing, there are a ton of operators for you to choose from. And so in today's video, I'm going to be ranking every single attacker on a tier list. Starting off with Ace, who's going to be going in the S tier. I think Ace belongs in the S tier for pretty obvious reasons. His Selma charges can allow him to open walls with ease from a distance and from safety, and he gets access to the AK-12, one of the best guns in the game. For an attacker to be this versatile, they just have to go up in the S tier. If it wasn't for Ace, attacking in Siege would be much more difficult because you would have a much harder time getting walls open, and you'd be at huge risk of dying in the process because you'd be stuck with a thermite. Now, the same thing cannot be said about Amaru, which is why she's going to be going in the D tier. Amaru is an operator that was clearly not designed for ranked. Her grappling hooks are fun to use in casual for going for quick rush plays and stuff, and you can pull off some pretty niche strategies with her if you pair her with like a Ying or a Grim, and then you go for like a rush execute. But generally, Amaru is not a strong operator by any stretch of the imagination, and you'd be better off picking pretty much every other operator in the game right now. And so because of that, I'm going to be putting her in the need rework tier. I understand that Ubisoft might not want to focus on balancing her because she is kind of a casually focused operator, but it still doesn't change the fact that she's really weak. Now, after Amaru, we have Ash, who's going to be going up in the A tier. Ash belongs in A tier because of the fact that her guns are incredibly good. The R4C is one of the best guns in the game for getting aggressive and taking gunfights, and the G36C is pretty solid as well. She also gets access to her breaching rounds, which can allow her to deal with utility for her teammates and to also open soft walls. She's a 3-speed, which can allow her to rotate quickly. The only real downside to Ash is that her secondary gadgets aren't the best, and that Zofia does have a better gadget than her, but overall, Ash is still a very solid operator that you can get utility out of in every round as long as you play her right. And the same thing can be said about Blackbeard, which is why he's going to be going in the top of A tier. Now, I know a lot of players would probably suggest putting Blackbeard up in the S tier. However, I don't think Blackbeard justifies that placement just yet. Blackbeard still has a ton of counters. If you bring traps, you can very easily deal with him. If you bring a lot of explosives like impacts and nitro cells, you'll be able to deal with him relatively easily. And if you bring operators like Smoke or just anyone with a shotgun, you can have a pretty easy time as well. However, despite those counters, Blackbeard is still a very strong operator for roam clearing, and he's also pretty strong for helping his team get into the building and take map control. Now, after Blackbeard, the next operator that's going to be getting ranked on this tier list is Blitz, and I'm going to be putting him in the B tier. Honestly, I used to hate on Blitz a lot, especially right after the shield rework, because I kind of felt that he had fallen out of the meta, but Blitz can still be a very solid operator, especially when the enemy team bans Blackbeard. Blitz can kind of fill the role that Blackbeard does, where he can help his team push aggressively to clear out roamers, and he can also help them take map control. The only real downside to Blitz is that he's also heavily countered by the same counters that Blackbeard is, and the fact that for him to get a lot of utility out of his flashes, he has to get pretty close to defenders, which can be difficult right now since all the defenders have to do is shoot your shield to slow you down. Now, after Blitz, the next operator I'm going to be placing on the tier list is Brava, and she's going to be going in the B tier as well, slightly above Blitz. Brava is a solid operator. If you bring her under the right circumstances, like if you notice the enemy team is bringing a lot of electronics, she can be an absolute menace. Sneaking your Brava drone into the bomb site and being able to hack Banshees, Maestro cameras, Echo drones, and Valkyrie cameras, and being able to flip those to your team to then use against the enemy can be exceptionally strong. Not to mention the fact that she still comes equipped with a secondary shotgun, smoke grenades, and 2 really strong primary weapons in the form of the Camraz DMR and the Para 308. Just a really solid pick. Just make for sure that when you do bring Brava to get the most out of her utility, you should only be bringing her against lineups on the enemy team that have a lot of electronic gadgets. Now, after Brava, we have Buck, who's going to be going in the upper part of A tier, and I don't think I really need to go too in depth on why that is. His underbarrel shotgun allows him to make holes extremely quickly. He can use that shotgun to play vertically and to just open soft walls. He gets flashbangs, and he gets an amazing primary weapon. You really just can't go wrong with picking Buck. Now, after Buck, we have Capitao, who's going to be going in the bottom of B tier. Capitao is still an exceptionally strong operator because of the fact that he has his fire bolts that can force defenders out of power positions, and for his smoke bolts that can allow him to cut off lines of sight. The only issue with Capitao in the current meta, in my opinion, is that Capitao kind of fills a similar role to a Grim, where he's meant to kind of help you take the bomb site and help you get onto the bomb site and get the plant down, and also to cover the plant. And I think Grim is just better at that task in most situations. Now, Capitao can be better than Grim for specific circumstances. For example, you need to push catwalk on Clubhouse. Having firebolts to physically force a defender off of that position can be stronger than Grim Bees, but generally, I think because of Grim's position in the meta right now, I think it's kind of hurt Capitao, and that's why I'm putting him in the bottom of B tier. After Capitao, the next operator that I'm going to be placing is Deimos, and he's going to be going in the lower half of A tier. Deimos is the definition of an operator that's good in every round. As long as you get scans off in the prep phase, you can guarantee that you get some form of intel out of your gadget by literally just clicking the mouse button. And as long as you're calling out to your teammates, that information can be extremely vital to allowing you to force roamers out of their roaming position, take the bomb site by pinging a defender that's playing on site, and you can also use him to play vertically on the bomb site to shoot people through the floor or the ceiling. He also comes equipped with nades, and his revolver is pretty decent as well. The only real issue with Deimos is that the AK-74 isn't the best, but even despite that, he's still exceptionally strong for getting your team intel. Speaking of intel, Dokkaebi is an absolute menace at getting intel and also denying it, and that's why she's going to be going in the S tier. Her ability to just call on her tablet, immediately force defenders off of their cameras, make a loud audio cue on the defenders' phones, and to also use her tablet to hack into their camera system makes Dokkaebi probably the most versatile operator in the game when it comes to their primary gadget. But on top of that, Dokkaebi also has access to a really good DMR, the Boss G, the SMG-12 as a secondary option, and great secondary gadgets. Dokkaebi is an operator that Ubisoft definitely needs to take a look at again and potentially try nerfing, because right now she's just too strong. Now after Dokkaebi, we have Finka, who's going to be going in the C tier. Now the reason why Finka is going in C tier is because she's only really useful when you're bringing a shield operator. If you're bringing a Blitz, Blackbeard, or Montagne, she can be really strong. However, if you're not bringing those operators, she's a lot more niche. The reason for that is because Blackbeard, Montagne, and Blitz all benefit from a faster ADS speed when you activate her surges, which can allow them to catch defenders off guard and get kills that they wouldn't have been allowed to otherwise. Also, her Finka surges have the added benefit on those operators to be able to heal chip damage. Since a lot of shield operators, when they're pushing defenders, they're going to get shot in the leg, and they're also going to get impacts thrown at them. Having the ability to click a button and then heal your shield operators can be huge. But like I said, if you're not bringing shield operators, then the only thing you're really getting out of Finka is a slight heal every once in a while, some nades, and some decent primary weapons. So she has to go in C tier for that reason. If she was useful in more strategies, I would put her higher on this list, but right now I think the only viable way to get use out of her is when you're running shields. Now after Finka, we have Flores, who's going to be going in the roughly middle of B tier. Flores is an operator kind of similar to Brava, where he only really thrives in situations where the defenders are bringing a lot of utility that he can counter. Now the situations where Flores is useful are a lot more common than Brava, because Flores can deny electronic utility and he can deny bulletproof utility, since his drones detonate instead of hack utility. So you can use Flores's drones to drive into a power position, and when you detonate them, you can get rid of a lot of defender utility with one drone. The only downside to Flores's drones is that they're really slow and loud, which can allow defenders to have a decent warning on them and potentially shoot them before they're able to get to their destination. On top of his pretty solid gadget, he also has access to the AR-33 and flashbangs though, which in my opinion does kind of help to boost him up a little bit. Overall, Flores is definitely a solid pick, especially if you drone out the enemy team and you know they're bringing a lot of bulletproof utility. After Flores, we have Fuze, who's going to be going in the top of C tier. Fuze is a very niche operator, and the reason for that is because his cluster charges are only really useful for dealing with lots of utility on the site and for detonating at strategic times to mass sound and to push into the bomb site and potentially get kills on defenders trying to run away from them. The situations where his cluster charges come in useful though are very few and far between, and that's because they make a loud audio cue when you place them down, which leaves you vulnerable to getting nitro celled, and because they give the defenders a long warning before the grenades actually detonate, so the defenders can very easily get away from them. The only real plus of Fuze is that he has access to secondary hard breach charges and the fact that he has access to the AK-12. I really do think that Fuze could get good with a couple more buffs, but right now with the way he's positioned, I just think he's too niche. Now after Fuze, we have Glaz, who is an operator that I think barely edges his way in to the B tier. The reason why Glaz is in B tier for me is because he can be exceptionally strong for coordinated takes onto the bomb site. If you bring a ton of operators with smoke grenades, or you bring an operator like Ying where they can overwhelm the bomb site very easily, or even you combine him alongside Grim, you can use Glaz to cause absolute chaos onto the bomb site and to get your team in and potentially allow them to go for a plant. Glaz is one of those attackers that benefits a lot from being alive at the end of the round, that can also be extremely important for your execute. On top of his scope obviously allowing you to see through smoke, he also has access to that DMR, which is one of the best DMRs in the game. He has smoke grenades in pocket, which allows him to mesh really well with his gadget. And he also has access to a bearing 9 or the Gon 6, depending on whether you want more fragging capability or you want to be able to deal with some utility. Now after Glaz, we have Gridlock, who's also going to be going in B tier, just in the middle part of it. Gridlock does bring a lot of utility. Her track stingers make a lot of noise. They can cut off flanks. They can also cut off defender rotations, and they're useful in a lot of situations. And on top of her primary gadgets, she also has access to a secondary shotgun. She has great secondary gadgets, and her primary weapons are pretty solid as well. However, Gridlock does have a couple huge downsides. The first of which is the fact that she's a 3 armor, which makes it extremely hard for her to move around the map easily. And since she's an operator clearly designed to cut off rotations, her being so slow and having to rotate so slowly means that it's going to take you a lot longer to get those track stingers down and get your setup going. Additionally, her track stingers can be countered really easily. If you throw your track stingers on a staircase, the defenders can just walk up to them, melee them, and make very little audio before walking up the staircase. This makes her kind of weak for flank watch, and since impacts can very easily get rid of all of her track stingers and other forms of explosives can do the same thing, I kind of think she has to go in the B tier. She's definitely a solid pick because of how much utility she has at her disposal, but I just don't think the quality of the utility she brings compares to some of the other operators on this list. Now after Gridlock, we have Grim, who's going to be going in the upper part of A tier, and I think that's for pretty obvious reasons. His Grim Bees allow him to overwhelm the bomb site, which can allow you to get an execute off. You can also overwhelm power positions with them to reveal the position of a potential defender, and he also has access to really great secondary gadgets, a secondary shotgun, and access to an amazing primary in the form of the commando. Overall, Grim is just an amazingly versatile operator that is way more useful than he was on release. The only real issue with Grim is that he's another attacker that requires you to stay alive for the majority of the round to get the most out of him. But as long as you play him right and you play safe with Grim and you wait until the end of the round to get super aggro, you can get a lot of utility out of those bees. Now after Grim, we have Hibanna, who's going to be going in the B tier next to Gridlock. I think Hibanna suffers from a lot in the current meta, and that is the fact that secondary hard breach charges can get hatches open pretty easily to the point where you kind of don't really need Hibanna unless the defenders are bringing a lot of anti-hatch utility or they're impact tricking. And then she also suffers from the fact that she can't really compete with getting walls open. She does have great guns in the form of the Type 89 and the Bearing 9 SMG as her secondary option, and she has flashbangs, which makes her loadout really good, but her gadget as a whole just isn't nearly as strong as it used to be. But her whole gadget as a whole just doesn't really hold up in the current meta, in my opinion. She's still strong, no doubt, and she can get hatches open extremely efficiently, but you'd most likely be better off just picking 1 or 2 operators with secondary hard breach charges and getting access to their gadgets on top of that. Now after Hibanna, we have Iana, who's going to be going in the top of B tier. Iana is an operator that's always been quite strong in Siege, and that's just because you can click a button and you have infinite drones. For an entry fragger, this can be exceptionally strong because you can get information and then react off of it in a gunfight, but it's also especially useful in solo queue because you can't really rely on teammates to give you callouts. And so being able to just click a button and get a free drone is pretty nice. She also gets the G36C and the ARX as her 2 primary options, which are both really good. And she also gets a Gon 6 and some pretty solid secondary gadgets. Overall, you can't really go wrong with picking Iana. You'll most likely get utility out of her when you pick her. Now, the same cannot be said about IQ, which is why she's going to be going in the middle of D tier. IQ is an operator that suffers a lot right now. The only situations to pick IQ in right now are when the enemy team is bringing a Valkyrie and when the enemy team is bringing an Echo. But bringing IQ just to counter those 2 operators is really not worth it, especially when you consider that there's other operators in the game right now like Brava that can help you out way more with them because you can actually flip that utility towards your team. I really don't see how you can justify bringing IQ. She definitely needs a rework from Ubisoft to make her more viable and to make her actually competitive in the meta. Now after IQ, we have Jackal, who's going to be going in the lower part of A tier. Jackal is a tracking operator that can absolutely dominate. His ability to just see footprints and then be able to track defenders down and chase after them is super useful for roam clearing. However, Jackal does have one major downside that stops him from going higher in this tier, and that also stops him from jumping up in the S tier. And that is the fact that when he scans footprints, it reveals his own position. This is because the defenders can tell kind of where they're getting scanned from just based off the amount of pings they're given. And so if you ping someone with Jackal, you can honestly get yourself killed because you can reveal your position to them, and then they can call your rough location out to another defender and they can potentially flank you. This is why picking Jackal is a huge risk. And when you compare Jackal to Deimos, I just don't think he can hold up, because being able to just get active wall hacks on someone with the click of a button is a whole lot better than being able to get a general location on them, especially since both operators effectively reveal their location to the defender. Now after Jackal, we have Callie, who's going to be going in the top of D tier. Now a couple of seasons ago, I probably would have put Callie at the bottom of D tier, but after I've been playing her more and more recently, I do think that Callie is a little bit better than what I originally thought, but she's still very weak. Callie has the major downside of being stuck on a sniper rifle that doesn't consistently one-shot, and if you're not good with the sniper rifle, then you're going to get fried in most gunfights. This combined with the fact that her secondary gadgets really aren't great kind of hurts Callie a lot and makes the reasons to pick her hard to justify. And now she does have a great gadget. Lance is being able to attach to a reinforced wall and detonate any sort of electronic utility on the other side, and the fact that her lances can just destroy a ton of bulletproof utility allows her to function as kind of like a makeshift Ash and Thatcher put together. And since she also has a secondary SMG, you can take some gunfights with her reliably. But however, like I said, with her being stuck on a primary sniper rifle that doesn't consistently one-shot, I cannot justify putting her higher than D tier. Now after Callie, we have Lion, who's going to be going in the lower part of A tier. Lion's just a solid all-round operator. All you have to do is just click your gadget button and all the defenders have to sit still for a few seconds. And this can be useful for slowing defenders' aggression, and it can also be useful for hunting down roamers once you drone them out. On top of this extremely simple to use and strong gadget, he also has access to the V308 assault rifle, the 417 DMR, and some great secondary gadgets. Just a really good operator overall. Now after Lion, we have Maverick, who's going to be going at the top of B tier. Maverick is an operator that is a really hard to use in ranked because of how time consuming his blowtorch is, and I've been very vocal about that in the past. And then however, he's still kind of strong, and that's because right now Cade, Tubarão, and Bandit can just absolutely ruin your day for trying to get walls open. When the enemies are bringing those three operators combined, you're basically forced to bring a Maverick, or they're going to be able to trick the wall, guaranteed. With the defenders being able to have access to so much anti-breach utility right now, I do think Maverick has jumped up a little bit on my list the more and more I've played ranked over the past few seasons, but I still don't believe he belongs in A tier because the only situations where you should be picking a Maverick is when the enemy team likes to trick a lot. Now after Maverick, we have Montagne, who's going to be going in the lower part of A tier. After the shield rework, Montagne definitely did get weaker because the defenders can just infinitely melee him to knock his shield away. However, the only thing that really affected was his ability to just sit in a corner with his shield up and just wait for the defenders to go for the defuse. Other than that situation, Montagne is still in a very strong position. This is because he was never designed with aggression in mind. So him getting shot multiple times and him getting slowed doesn't really matter. Montagne was always designed for taking power positions and map control, and a full extended Montagne is still exceptionally good at that. Montagne does have some counters just like all the other shield operators, which is when the defenders bring a lot of traps, and he's also vulnerable to melees and shotguns. But overall, still an operator that you can get a lot of utility out of in every round as long as you play him properly. Now after Montagne, we have Nokk, who's going to be going in the bottom of C tier. Nokk is an operator that is literally the definition of niche. Her gadget is entirely designed around going for solo lurking plays, which is basically when you just sneak up a staircase or try to flank the enemy without them noticing. And the reason why her gadget is good at that is because when you activate her ability, she hides herself on cameras. Now this is a decent ability, especially in ranked where teams aren't nearly as coordinated, but in most situations, if you want to go for a lurk, you'd be better off picking an operator like Dokkaebi that can actually physically force the defenders off of their cameras, and that can also give you additional sound information on where the defenders are in the bomb site. Also, Nokk's weapons aren't that great either. The FMG9 SMG is really not that great, and the Desert Eagle is a decent handgun, but you're not really going to ever be using it. The only really redeeming quality about Nokk is the fact that she has frag grenades and the fact that she can be useful against enemy teams that rely heavily on cameras. Like if you notice, a rank stack likes to bring a Maestro and a Valkyrie a lot. Bringing a Nokk can be extremely devastating to that, but outside of those situations, she's still a pretty niche operator. Now after Nokk, we have Nomad, who's going to be going in the lower part of B tier. Nomad is an operator that I have hated on a lot in the past, and I did put her at the top of C tier in my last tier list, I believe, but Nomad, in my opinion, has gone up a little bit in my rankings, and that's because I've noticed a lot of people just misuse Nomad. If you're using Nomad for flank watch, you're using her incorrectly. The way you want to use Nomad is to shoot her air jabs into the bomb site or onto power positions to then either force the defenders to look up at them and shoot them, or to force them to run away from the air jab, and both of which will allow you to swing them and get a free gunfight. Also, in the bomb site specifically, if you shoot them on a doorway between the two sites or on a rotate, the defenders don't really have any other choice but to avoid that rotate or doorway because they can't really get rid of the air jab unless they have impacts on them. And so this makes Nomad a pretty strong operator for the site execute. She also has access to the ARX assault rifle and flashbangs, which makes her a pretty decent operator. I used to hate on her a lot, but I do think she's starting to grow on me a little bit. After Nomad, we have Osa, who's going to be going in the upper part of B tier. Osa is an operator that can be difficult to understand, but once you get the hang of it, she can be a really solid operator. And that's because her Talon shields can allow her to walk down a power position, place a shield down, and then have a stationary position to play behind safely and just cause havoc on the bomb site. The defense have to worry a lot about Osa shields because if you place them in the right positions, they can cut off long lines of sight and force the defenders to avoid rotating in front of them. This is why Osa is so strong on bomb sites with outside breaches, because she can pull out her shield, walk into the bomb site, place it down, and then she can either plant behind it or she can just sit there and hold it, and the defenders can't really do anything about it, especially if they don't have extra impacts on hand. However, that is the one downside to Osa, the fact that she's so easily countered by impacts. If she wasn't so easily countered by impacts, she'd be much higher on this list, but because impacts are so common on defenders right now, and since she's so hard countered by it, I can't really justify putting her any higher. Now after Osa, we have Ram, who's going to be going in the lower part of A tier. Ram is definitely an operator that you'll get utility out of in every round. Her buggy drones can allow you to make a ton of vertical holes. You can throw them through barricades to make aggressive plays, and you can also use them to mask sounds of a rotation that you're doing. Just keep in mind that when you do use Ram's buggy drones, the sound goes both ways, so the defenders can use your buggy drones against you to potentially flank you. But on top of her buggy drone, she also has access to the R4C, one of the best guns in the game, and she has access to flashbangs and I believe smoke grenades. This makes Ram one of the best operators in the game and someone that you cannot go wrong with picking. The same cannot be said about the newest operator, Rauora, and I'm going to be putting her in the top of C tier. Rauora has a major problem, and that is the fact that her gadget is countered by a ton of stuff. Her barricades, when shot onto a surface, are countered by mute jammers, they're countered by castle barricades, they're countered by tuberal canisters, they're countered by impact grenades, nitro cells, they're countered by Oryx because he can just ram through them, and they're also countered by Jaeger and Wamai because if Rauora shoots her barricades into the bomb site and they go past a Jaeger ADS or a Wamai magnet, they will catch the barricade and destroy it. This makes Rauora extraordinarily weak because there's very few situations where you're going to be able to deploy a gadget somewhere near the bomb site and not one of those gadgets be involved somewhere nearby. She's literally countered by some of the most picked operators on the defense. And on top of being countered by some of the most picked operators on the defense, she's also countered by just straight up impacts. And this can be pretty damning as well, because if you go for a plant with a Rauora barricade nearby and you don't watch it, defenders can throw an impact on the barricade and then swing you, and you'll have no idea because you weren't even watching it or focusing on that barricade. Rauora can be useful for making individual plays because you can use her barricades to cut off lines of sight and take one-on-one gunfights, but overall in an execute, I don't think Rauora is that strong. And honestly, if you want to cut off lines of sight and you want to go for a one-on-one gunfight, I definitely think operators like Nomad would most likely be more useful because the effects of her gadget can be more useful and her air jabs are easier to get deployed. Overall though, I do think they fill a similar niche. I just think Rauora is slightly worse. Now after Rauora, we have Sens, who's going to be going in the middle of C tier. Sens is an operator that has kind of been all over the place on the tier list for me. Sens can be useful for specific executes where you have a plan in place and you throw your lineups on very specific spots to cut off the lines of sight while the rest of your team is either repelling in windows or spamming the bomb site with utility. However, if you haven't practiced Sens and you don't have specific lineups already designed, then you're going to have a very hard time playing them. And that's because Sens's ROU projectors have a very wonky hitbox. They bounce off objects when they shouldn't, and it can be very frustrating. This combined with the fact that Sens's gadget is countered by a ton of operators, including Mute, Jaeger, and Wamai, makes their projectors really hard to get utility out of. I will say it's nice now that you can activate and deactivate their projectors, but even with that change in mind, I still don't think they're that strong. Now after Sens, we have Sledge, who's going to be going in the middle of B tier. Sledge is an operator that has fallen off a lot in the meta, mainly just because of the fact that Ram and Buck just do his job better. Sledge has to actually get up close to surfaces and actually melee them, which means that he's way more vulnerable to getting nitro celled, and he's also less versatile because of that. Now the saving grace for Sledge is the fact that he does still have access to nades, which is a stronger secondary gadget than what's available on Buck and Ram, but most people are not going to want to pick Sledge just for a better secondary gadget, and especially since he's a 3 armor, the justifications for picking him in comparison to these other operators are quite slim. Now you still can get utility out of him, which is why I still have him in B tier, but he's just not nearly as good as the competition. Now after Sledge, we have Striker, who's going to be going in the lower part of B tier. Striker just literally allows you to bring whatever secondary gadgets you want. And the reason why I have her in the bottom of B tier is because most of the time you can just get the utility that you would get out of Striker by just picking the right operator lineup. If you want a lot of nades, bring a lot of nades on operators that you're already running. If you want to bring EMPs and secondary hard breach charges, bring those on other operators so you can actually get their gadget involved. Now, the one reason why I do have Striker up in the B tier is because in solo queue, he can absolutely dominate. He can go and get walls open completely by himself, and he can get hatches open completely by himself as well with the secondary hard breach and impact EMP strategy. And he also has really good guns, which can allow him to frag out as well. I definitely think Striker is a solid operator. I just think his utility dwindles away once you're playing in a 5-stack, since you can just coordinate the secondary gadgets with the rest of your team. And next up, we have Thatcher, who's going to be going slightly above Montagne in the A tier. Thatcher is going here for pretty obvious reasons. His EMPs have a super wide radius that can allow you to get rid of electronic utility, and he has pretty good guns. I don't think I really need to discuss him any further because most of you won't be surprised by him being there. He's exceptionally strong in this meta because of how overwhelming Bandit and Cade are. Now, after Thatcher, we have Thermite, who's going to be going in the middle part of B tier. Thermite's going here for reasons I discussed with Ace. He's just outclassed by Ace in pretty much every way. He has to get up close to a wall, which means that he's left vulnerable for a significant period of time. His animation is slow and it's really loud, which means that a bandit can very easily trick him. And he also doesn't have nearly as good guns as Ace does. So he just has to go in B tier. He's definitely a solid pick if you want to get some outside walls open, but you most likely be better off picking Ace in almost every situation. After Thermite, we have Twitch, who's going to be going in the top part of B tier. The reason she's going here is because her F2 can be strong, even though the recoil is kind of high. And she also has access to the 417 if you want a replacement, which is really strong. And she also has access to smoke grenades, and her Twitch drones can be really useful. If you use your normal drones to drone out electronic utility like traps, Jaeger ADSs, Wamai magnets, pretty much anything you can think of, you can then use your Twitch drones to go back to those locations and destroy that utility. And Twitch can destroy all of that utility from the safety of the rooftop of the map or from outside of the map. And she doesn't really have to worry about dying trying to clear that utility like the rest of your team would. Now, after Twitch, we have Ying, who's going to be going in the lower part of S tier. And I think that's for obvious reasons. Her Candelas can absolutely overwhelm the bomb site and help her team go for a plant extremely easily. And they can also be useful for just forcing defenders away from a power position or from a roam. Because once a Candela goes flying, you basically have no other choice other than to run or try to take the gunfight aggressively. And both can play in Ying's favor. And this combined with the fact that she has a pretty good LMG and smoke grenades just makes her an absolute site execution demon. So as long as you stay alive with her and you save those Candelas for the late round, you will end up succeeding with Ying. Now, after Ying, we have Zofia, who's going to be going in the upper part of A tier. And Zofia is mainly going here because she's basically just Ashe but better. She has the ability to deal with 2 pieces of bulletproof utility, and she has 2 stuns. The only really advantage that Ashe has over Zofia is the fact that her breaching rounds can deal with a Mira. By deploying her Ashe charge onto a mirror window, it will shatter it, whereas Zofia's impact grenades won't do that. But that's the only real reason why you'd ever want to pick Ashe over Zofia, because Zofia's guns are still very strong and can compete with Ashe's, and she also has secondary hard breach charges, and like I said, she also has stuns built into her launcher. And after Zofia, we have the final operator, Zero, who's going to be going in the lower part of B tier. I think Zero is an operator that can be decent depending on the map, because there's some maps where you can throw a ton of cameras very easily from outside and get a ton of information really quickly, like Bank. Bank is a really good map for him. I think Border's a pretty decent map for him as well, but there's also some maps that can be very difficult to get utility out of him, like Outback. So it kind of depends on what map you're going, but generally if you're on a map that Zero thrives on, you're gonna get a lot of utility out of him. The only other real issue with Zero is that if you don't have teammates that are consistently calling out, like let's say you're in solo queue or you're not in a 5-stack, then his usefulness can drop off significantly because you can't really rely on your teammates to actually take advantage of it. But in my experience, since I play in 5-stacks a lot, his Zero cameras can be absolutely vital to help you catch a flank, to help you catch a defender rotating inside the bomb site, and also help you in those clutch situations get the crucial information to make the right decision. And yeah, that's gonna wrap up today's video. This is the full tier list right here. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of the placements in the comments down below. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. Now, if you want to watch another video, a video will be popping up on your screen right now that I'm sure you'll all enjoy. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.